Perfect. Okay, so welcome everyone who's joining us this morning, both here in Malmö, where we have the on-site talk, but also, of course, everyone who's joining online. We also wanted to say a special hello to another breakfast gang who's actually having a little satellite watch party in Linköping at East Sweden Game co-working space. So it's really fun that you also set up your own little thing so you can tune in from there. Yeah, so also another thing for the online audience, since we're going to talk about cultural context and stuff, it would be really fun to also know from where everyone is joining us in the stream. So if you want to like type that in the chat, please do. Yeah, but just very quickly, for you who are here, first things first, in case of emergency, there is something going on, there is a exit down that side, just down the stairs for the assembly point, and then also that's where you find the bathrooms if you need it later on. Yes, but I'm Elin, I'm the Community Development Manager here at Game Habitat. And for those of you who don't know Game Habitat, I guess most of you do, but anyway. We're a community-focused, non-profit game cluster organization working here in Malmö, but we also cover all of southern Sweden, so Blekinge and Skåne. And we're working to support the most successful, creative, and diverse ecosystem for game development. And the house we're in today as well is known as our Dev Hub. It's a community space and a shared office building for game developers. Yeah, so warm welcome here. Let's see. So Game Habitat, as a member organization, we represent around 95% of the regional industry. We're now over 40 members who all support us in the mission that we have. And with our members includes everything from AAA to indies, as well as service providers and publishers and others who believe in what we do. And of course, we also have our public and private partners, who are also very important financial supporters of us and enabling us in to do what we do. I'm not going to talk more than I need. It's DevTalk time. We're going to first listen to Marthe, which is our speaker for today. Very fun to have you here. And we will also open, after the talk, we're going to open for a Q&A session, where you can raise your hand if you have a question. We're going to run around with a microphone. But also for the online audience, just feel free to write your questions or comments or yays in the chat, and we will also bring those up. So we have my colleague Jesper is also going to keep an eye on the chat. So he will bring up some of the questions from the online audience as well. So don't be shy. And for us here on site, we're also going to do breakfast after the talk is done. So if you can hang around after we're done, then please stay for some breakfast. Without further ado, please welcome Marthe.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much for having me here, Ellen. Thank you for inviting me. I'm super excited to be here. I'm going to talk about Japandinavian game design. So what that is about, we'll find out today. And this presentation will have 3 sections. I'll start with an introduction and tell you a little bit about me, and also a little bit of a framework of the 5 keywords that I really want to talk about. Because these 5 things really changed how I work, and I still apply it every day in my work today. And at the end, we'll have a conclusion and a Q&A. So let's start. A little bit about me. I'm Marthe Jonkers. I'm originally from the Netherlands, where I studied game design and development. And now I am an art director at Massive here in Sweden. And in between the Netherlands and Sweden, a lot of stuff happens. So I'll give you a bit of a summary of that, because that is really what this talk will be about. Because after I graduated from game design development in the Netherlands, there was just still something that I really wanted to solve. There was this mystery to me, because I learned how to make games in the Netherlands, very clear how to do that. But it just seemed like Japanese games were not following that at all. I didn't understand how those games were made, because they were so unexpected, kind of quirky, innovative. I was really wondering, like, hey, maybe they do things differently in Japan, and I want to find out. So after graduating, I got a scholarship to do a research master at Kyoto Seika University, where I studied for a little bit. That's me with my teammates. We made a PS Vita game back in the day. It was a really awesome experience. I learned a lot there about how Japanese game development is done. And I can spoil you already, it's completely different from how we do it in the West. So that was really, really interesting to me. At that time, I was also doing some freelance work. My background is in concept art. So I did a little bit for Metal Gear Rising and a couple of other games where I was trying to fund my year in Japan. And after that year, I got a job at Capcom, which was a dream come true. I really like Capcom games. And I was a concept artist for Dragon's Dogma IP, which was really, really interesting experience. And after a few years, I actually joined the Monster Hunter World team, and that was also amazing. I think a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today is based on my experiences there. However, I also had a lot of other things I learned after this, because after 5 or 6 years, I was really curious. I kind of found out how Japanese game development worked by that time, and I'll talk about that today. So I was really curious, like, okay, so now I know how it works in the Netherlands, I know how it works in Japan, but what about other places? Is it different everywhere? And by that time, CD Projekt was working on Cyberpunk. And I thought, like, okay, you know, I actually live in basically a cyberpunk world. I was living in Osaka at the time. It's like, I can really contribute to this game, so you know what, I'm just gonna try. And I got hired. I was a lead concept artist for Cyberpunk. Me and my team, we worked on the design of Night City. Designing a megacity is a whole other challenge. I could do a whole talk about that as well, but not today. I worked there for 4 or 5 years, also on Phantom Liberty, the expansion. And again, the way people work there was, again, very, very different. So I would start to realize, okay, every place does things differently. That's super interesting. But at this time, I finished up Phantom Liberty, and then there was this company, Massive, in Sweden, that announced that they were working on the first ever open world Star Wars game. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, so I was like, I have to go there. I have to help out with this. And I joined Massive about 4 years ago, first as a lead concept artist and later as art director for Outlaws. So this is my experience, and this is what I'm going to talk about today. But before I move on to the keywords, I want to give a little bit of a framework. I want to talk a little bit about game design practices in different places. As I said, I think every place does it differently. There's no one magical formula how to make good games. Every place, every country, every project has a different way of working. However, I think there's roughly 2 kind of different ways that I've noticed how games are made. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. This way, you probably recognize this way of working. It's very linear. This is how I learned it in school as well in the Netherlands. You start with the blue sky phase, right? You have tons of ideas. You move into pre-production, you kind of organize those ideas. You plan your game for production, you finish it up in post-production. And then the big yellow blob is the target audience that's kind of hovering above it. You try to involve it in every step. And this is kind of the way how I learned how to make games and how I see it a lot in the West as well. And of course, it's never as smooth as this. Usually it branches off or you have to start over again. But the essence of it is that it's quite linear. It's step by step. You have to finish the first step before you go to the second. And the result that you get from a process like this is, for example, a jet fighter. Jet fighters, they are designed in a linear process. You need to have a blueprint. You start with an actual plan. You plan out exactly what you're going to make, and then you move on to the next step where you're going to have the materials and the right people to work on it. And you end up with a super cool design, a jet fighter, but you have to go through all of these steps to get there. So this is really like an example of this systematic design. Now, like I said, in Japan it's completely different. So you can forget about all of that. I tried to visualize my experience in Japan of how they made games there, and it's more like this. So it's definitely not linear. I mean, there's still like blue sky phase, there's still production and pre-production, there's still post-production, but it's not in a linear way. In Japan, they work more evolutionary. So they start maybe with a blue sky phase and move into production, but you can have another blue sky phase somewhere in production because by that time they're like, okay, this stage is kind of boring. Let's think of a new game mechanic to make it more interesting. You get another blue sky phase there. Or, oh, this character is so cool. Let's finish this character up completely, even if we haven't figured out the game yet. It's kind of, they let things grow in a direction that they think is interesting. So you might not end up at the end what you plan to do at the beginning. So that's a very big difference from how usually in the West we work. And they're still target audience, but they play a slightly different role. They are less involved in the entire process. And while in Japan you're still working for a target audience, they're not so involved in every step. So that's quite a difference. And we'll talk about that more. Now you might wonder what the end result of a process of this could be. And that could be a lion. A lion is a result of evolutionary design. And the thing is, lions and jet fighters are both super cool designs. It's not that one is better than the other, but the way to get to these designs is just completely different. All right, with this in the back of your head, I'm going to talk about the 5 keywords. And I'm actually going to teach you some Japanese. And it's not because these things are only applicable to Japanese game design, not at all. I've seen it in Poland, I've seen it here. But it is, I think, they just have a way with words that exactly cover what I want to say. Plus, it's always fun to learn more Japanese, I think so. Let's do that. So the first keyword that I want to talk about is Mitakotonai, or Mitakotonai. And this means something not yet seen before. And I heard this a lot when I was working at Capcom. It was really like, try to design something that players haven't seen before. And of course, we all want to do that, right? We want to make stuff that people are surprised by and haven't seen before. And yet, most of the portfolios I see in ArtStation, for example, it all looks the same. So it's quite hard to make something that people haven't seen before. And I ran into that as well when I was working at Capcom, but I got some advice that I wanted to share. So I was working on Dragon's Dogma, and I had to design a castle, because Dragon's Dogma is a fantasy RPG, it has a lot of castles in there. And I was gathering references and showed it to my lead, and she was like, "What are you doing, Martha? What is this?" I'm like, "I have to design a castle, right? So, you know, I have castles here." And then she said, "Yeah, but how are you going to design something original if you're only going to base it on existing things? You will only be able to make a variation of something that's already there." So I was like, okay, that's interesting. So how do I make it into something that people haven't seen before? And then she gave me a really good tip, and that was to really think of the essence of everything that you're designing, kind of bring it down to the essence, and then find a reference that connects to that same essence, but is completely different. So in the example of this castle, a castle is a fortified building. It's very strong, has walls, has a tower, but in essence, it's just a very strong building. So I was looking into, for example, brutalist architecture at that time. Like, okay, this actually looks very fortified and strong. So it has the same characteristics as a castle, but it's a reference that is completely unrelated to castles. And then I tried to mix that with the castle design and come up with shapes that were surprising, but still very relatable. It's still obviously a castle, but you're using a reference that is totally not related to it. And that was a really, really nice tip, and I used it in every design. I also had to do armor designs, and armor is basically plating. What else has plating? Beetles have shields. So, and they have super cool colors and textures as well. So it's perfect inspiration to combine with armor designs. And this goes for super realistic games as well. You can always find that sort of small twist to it, as long as you stick to the essence of what it is that you want to design. So I really learned to push that and think about all the references that I was using. Because you have the things that first come to mind. When you think of a castle, you all have a castle in your head. And it's good to be aware of that. Like, what is that thing that comes to mind first? But then there's a lot of things that are very unfamiliar. Maybe you remember it from your childhood, a city where you grew up. Or maybe it's like in Malmö, you have a castle that looks very different from the castle I have in my head. There's tons and tons of very interesting, slightly more unfamiliar references. And then you have the stuff that you didn't even know it existed. And that's also super interesting. And here, for that, you have to do some research. You really have to find it, because you've probably never encountered it. So you have to do research and find like these interesting references of buildings in places you've never been to, for example. And I was really encouraged to kind of dip into that mostly, to move away from the first things that come to mind and really take that extra step. And for me, that was really, really helpful and very interesting. So I was super hyped because now I knew how to design things that people hadn't seen before. And I was showing my concept art to the director. But often he would just say, janai. And janai is basically, it's Osaka slang for, yeah, that's not bad. And then he would move on to the next thing. I was like, yeah, it's obviously not good, because otherwise I would have gotten a go or a green light. So there's something wrong with this concept, but he's not telling me. He's just saying janai. And it really frustrated me at first. And I wasn't the only one who was experiencing this, sort of not getting any feedback. My partner, he worked in Tokyo at the time, and he had the exact same thing, where his art director was just saying janai and just not giving any notes. So actually, you actually asked your art director, why aren't you telling me what I have to improve on this concept? Why aren't you telling me what you want to see? And then she answered, if I tell you exactly what to do, I will not be able to ever see what you think is the best solution. I am curious to see what you would come up with. And secondly, I want you to learn what the game is about. Because if you really understand what the game is that you're working on, you'll be able to do much better concepts. And you need to find out yourself. I'm not going to tell you exactly what that is. So that was very interesting to me as well. Like, wow, so this is why they're not telling anything. They want me to find out. And to be fair, in Japan, there's a system where after graduation, you join a company, you get training for 3 years, you stay there forever, basically. So there's lots of time to train your employees in getting to know how to work. I think in the West, we have a tendency to change jobs more often, so you don't really have that opportunity. So being an art director now myself, I would never not give any feedback to my team and just say janai and just go on to the next thing. However, I think the idea of having to find out for yourself what it is that is good for your game is actually quite good. My briefs, for example, are not super detailed because of that. Not because I don't have an idea in my head. I have a very strong opinion on how things should look, for example. But I want to see what the team can come up with. And this really worked for me back in the days, that I would just take my headphones, put them away, just start to walk around, see what the rest of the team was doing, seeing the animation, seeing the character design, starting to understand what it actually was, the game that I was working on. And I got inspired by that as well. I saw like, oh, this character has a certain skill. What if the environment has, I don't know, pillars you can break down? Or like, I was starting to think about the game as a game developer instead of a concept artist. And I think that really, really influenced how I work still. Like, I try to approach things as a game developer first. And then I'm a concept artist, art director, narrative designer, level designer. Because we're all making a game, we're not just doing our own small thing. And learning to understand what you're working on, you can come up with much, much better ideas. And I applied this in CD Projekt a lot. Me and my team worked on the concepts for Night City. And like I said, designing a megacity is it's not easy. And we found a way of doing that by making these kind of concepts where we were really approaching the design from a developer's perspective. We were trying to solve the game by designing these things, not just, oh, this is exactly the architecture, or this is like a small element in there. And there's a time and place for these super detailed concepts. But these kind of concepts, I was really thinking about the game design as well. For example, this is an industrial area in Night City. And I was thinking, what if there's this acid waste drain and it's broken and it's actually leaking? So if you drive there, your car would get damaged. So you have to be careful if you go into that district. You might need to bring an umbrella because it's, it might hurt your health if you walk around there. I was also thinking about like, oh, if you're driving there, wouldn't it be cool if there's moving things in the air to kind of get the movement of the city, the liveliness? What if there's AVs in the sky that are just hovering there? So I was thinking of tons and tons of ideas in these concepts, and you can find more of these on ArtStation and also from my team to see how we approach the design of Night City. And it's not that someone told us like, hey, you have to make these kind of concepts. No, we were thinking like, this is helpful for designing a megacity. Let's just do it that way. And it was super helpful. Like many teams could use this concept in their work. So it was really, really a good way to work. So now I knew how to make something that people hadn't seen before. And I was thinking as a game developer, so I thought like, I can do everything now. And then I learned this, Shouganai, or Shikataganai. Nothing we can do about it. So that was a really tough lesson. It's something I think we all have to learn if we work on games. And it means something, there's a bit of resignation in it, like it can't be helped. And an acceptance as well, that sometimes things don't go as you want them to go. And Shouganai is really about letting go. You also have to let go sometimes of the things that you're working on. Because I realized creativity is inherently chaotic. If you try to confine creativity, it's not creativity anymore. Creativity just needs to be able to grow wherever it wants to grow. And chaos also means that not everything you do will end up in the game. And I think that was a big lesson for me, because I made tons of concepts that never ended up in the game. And sometimes that hurt, because I had this idea from Monster Hunter that there was this monster that came from the clouds and would dive down. I thought, like, it's the coolest thing ever. Did not end up in the game. Very hurt. And there's lots of stuff for Cyberpunk where I had tons of ideas that were really cool, but just it didn't fit with the story, or it just didn't fit with the game. So it didn't end up there. And that's okay. And it's totally fine to make stuff that doesn't end up in the game. And it isn't just for concept art, it's also for if you're trying out a level design and it doesn't work, it's okay to let go. It's not a big deal. And I think that for me was really eye-opening in the sense that I felt more free to also try things out. Just try weird stuff out, because there's no pressure that it has to be for the game, the most efficient way to get to the game. No, it's fine. We can let creativity sometimes go in their chaotic ways as it does, and just embrace that chaos, embrace the unpredictability, and stay calm, and just Shouganai. Now the fourth keyword I think is a very interesting one. It's ma. And we don't have actually a word for it in the West. It's very hard to translate. It means something like the space in between, or like a gap, but it's not like a meaningless space. It is a space that needs to be there. So for me, it's very hard to translate it. So I'll give you some examples. But the reason it's so hard to translate is because in the West, we tend to really focus on action. We have a lot of words for action. And also when we describe our games, we often use action verbs like you shoot, you jump, you drive cars, you do stuff. But this is not about that. This is about those moments in between. And for me, this was really that I started to think of games more as an experience rather than a set of actions. Because if you think of a game as an experience, you start to think of, you know, it's more than just the actions. It's for example, are you an assassin? Are you a spy? Are you a warrior? Do we want the game to be about loneliness, about being invulnerable, about, I don't know, being sad or happy? And those things, for me, understanding what the game is about in those terms, this helps me a lot if I have to think of, for example, art direction or world around the game. If you tell me, I want to make a game where you can shoot, that really doesn't give me anything to design a world that could contribute to that. But if you're saying, like, I want to make a game about an assassin that feels very lonely, I can think about, okay, loneliness. Okay, maybe this is a huge city, but there's almost nobody there, so it feels really empty. Or like, there's tons of ideas that can spark from thinking of games as more of an experience. And not just in art, but in every department. Level design can think about, okay, loneliness, maybe I use a lot of open spaces for this game because, you know, you get this feeling across. And it really helps to kind of work together towards an experience instead of just a set of actions. So you're using all of the tools in your toolbox to actually design an experience. And I think, you know, it's very this concept of ma, that you also include like the moments where you're just standing still, doing nothing. You see that a lot in Ghibli movies, for example. They use it a lot. They really use this as a tool in their storytelling. This is Kiki's delivery service. And in this scene, she's just lying in the grass. Like, there's nothing happening. Story isn't progressing. There's no new information, nothing. It's just a moment. But it's so crucial to this movie because it really grounds you in the world and in the experience of this movie. And what I thought was super interesting about this as well is, as you can see, there's stuff moving. You can almost feel the wind. You can almost smell the grass. And those are senses that you cannot really use when you're making a game, for example. We're very visual. You have some audio, and maybe you have some feedback from your controller, but we cannot use all of our senses to make a game. So what the Ghibli movies do is they actually kind of emulate that in scenes like this, so you're still experiencing an environment with all of your senses. And I thought that was super interesting and something that I really want to do more in games as well, where you're trying to take the time to say, like, hey, this is what this world is about. Just stand still and look around. And you have a lot of this in manga as well. Vagabond is a very action-focused manga. Still has tons of panels where it's just flower, flower and a bee, bee, bee on a flower. 4 panels with just flowers, or 5 maybe. And yet it just adds a lot to, you know, the grounding of the character in this world, just having this moment of calmness in an otherwise very action-focused story. And this is, for example, a difference I see with American comics that are way more action-focused and have less of these kind of moments where you just, hey, this is where you are, this is the world, this is the experience. So you're thinking of a game as a composition. You're using the action points, but also the calm moments in your composition, just as you do in your art or in your storyline. We do it everywhere. But you can also apply that to a game as a whole. And that's what Ma told me. So we're already at the last keyword, and that's Wagamama. And this is, it actually has quite a negative meaning. It means being a little bit selfish, doing things your own way. You're doing your own thing. But for me, it actually had a very positive meaning in terms of making games. Because Wagamama is all about finding your personal inspiration for all of your designs and really diving into what you think is interesting as a person with your background. And I'll give you some funny examples. So I'm from the Netherlands. And when I was working on Monster Hunter Worlds, I had to design an area in the second stage, which is called the Wildspire Waste. And it's a bit of a swampy area with some desert elements as well. We were doing a lot of research into soil types, humidity, making sure that the plants that were growing there made sense, even though it was a very fantasy-focused game. Everything we did was always trying to ground it in reality, so it makes sense, and then you can go as crazy as you want. But I had to design this area, and I was just struggling of, like, how can I make it unique? How can I make it Mitakotonai, that people haven't seen it before? And then I remembered this kind of landscape. We have it in the Netherlands, where I grew up. I grew up near a very nature area. It's called the Veluwe. And on the Veluwe, you have fields of these kind of flowers. I think they're called heath in English. And you have them in Sweden as well, which is super cool. In Japan, you didn't have them. And they are in bloom, I think now, like in August and September. And then you have this beautiful purple ocean of flowers, and it's just gorgeous. And I remember just as a child just walking there and just being amazed by the colors, and just, I thought it was beautiful. And then I thought, these plants actually grow in the type of soil that we want to have in this stage, in Monster Hunter. So I thought, like, I'm just going to make a concept with those flowers and show that to my director, see what he thinks. And this time he didn't say in janai. He said, wow, that's cool. I haven't seen that before. And of course, you can't really Google this, right? It's such a personal experience. Only I kind of know about this. And it ended up in the game. So in Monster Hunter World, there's actually an area that would not have been there if I hadn't worked on this project. So that for me was the Wagamama. Like, I'm putting stuff in there that is so personal to me. And this is also why it's so good to have diverse teams, because you would get tons of these personal ideas. So much stuff that you wouldn't know about, but someone else has a background in it or a memory of it. It's it's like a treasure trove of cool ideas. And another funny example is in Cyberpunk. If you're Dutch, you recognize this. We have this in the Netherlands. It's basically a vending machine. It's a wall of glass windows, and behind each window, there's some fast food, some snack. And you have to put coins in there, and then you can open it up, get your food. We have it on train stations because you can quickly get some food. No human interaction needed. You just get your food and you go to your train. And it's really funny because I think you only have this in the Netherlands. And I was designing a roadhouse motel for Cyberpunk. And I thought, like, I'm gonna add that to this place because it's super cyberpunk. It's kind of technological, but there's also there's no human interaction. There's a cyberpunk thing about this kind of vending machines. So I added that to the concept, and that also ended up in the game. And in Night City, you will find a lot of these food vending machines that are super Dutch. And again, it wouldn't have been in the game if I hadn't worked on it and dipped into my own cultural background to add these ideas to the game. There's another aspect to Wagamama as well that I wanted to talk about. And that has to do with the yellow blob, the target audience. I told you that in Japan, the relationship with the target audience is slightly different, I feel like, from how I worked in Poland and here and in the Netherlands. And I'm showing you these two games because for me those are examples that would have never been made in the West. And the reason is, if you would playtest an early version of Dark Souls with people, they would be so frustrated. Like, it's too difficult. I'm dying constantly. I'm losing everything I gathered. They would probably throw the controller out of the window if they would have played this game in a very early stage. And I think if we would have made it in the West, we would say, okay, this isn't working. People don't like games that are that difficult. They find it frustrating. But the Wagamama part here is that From Software, they really believed in what they were doing, because they were going for this kind of nostalgia feeling of old games that were quite hard, like in the 80s and 90s. Those games are super difficult. And the sense of accomplishment you get from overcoming something that's really difficult, that's a very strong feeling. And this is what they were going for. And they enjoyed what they were doing. And they made the right choice. I mean, this game eventually became super popular. It sparked a whole new genre in games. I mean, how many Souls games were announced this last Gamescom? Maybe 9 or 10. Like, it's super influential. And it existed because the team believed in their game. And then I realized as well, maybe the team is also your target audience. Maybe you don't have to test everything all the time, but you're testing it with your team. And if the team is enjoying what they're doing, there's probably lots of people who will enjoy it as well. So that's a very interesting concept. And Death Stranding, I think, is the same way, in the sense that if you would test that game very early, in a very early stage, if you would test that with an audience, I mean, stumbling on the terrain, and, you know, your cargo dropping, super frustrating. I'm not sure if people would really like it. But it's actually a very highly rated game now. And it's also because I feel like Death Stranding is also leaning again into that experience. It's not leaning into action, it's leaning into an experience. So for me, that's hiking. I really like to hike. We have no mountains in the Netherlands, so I have to go abroad always to find some terrain to hike onto. But hiking in itself, it's very frustrating. You see the top of the mountain, and you know it's going to be hard to get there. And you know it's going to be rough terrain. And even though the views are beautiful, your backpack is really heavy. It's quite an ordeal, but once you get to the top, that feeling is just indescribable, and that makes everything okay, because you got to the top of the mountain. That's really what Death Stranding is about. Like, you're stumbling on the train, you see where you have to go, but getting there, that's where you get the satisfaction. So it's very an experience-based game. And I think Death Stranding, if you've played it, is also a very good example of using Ma. There's moments in this game where you know where you're going. And it's not really, you know, the challenge isn't anymore to get to that point. You just have to walk there. But then music starts playing, and suddenly you have this mood, you get into this vibe, and that's something that I hadn't seen before in other games. It's just using using those moments of calmness in such an extreme way that you really get into the mood of the game. So in many ways, this game has a lot of these things that we talked about today, and it's also an example of doing something that you believe in yourself, and as a team yourself, and just making that and enjoying that, and then a lot of people enjoy that as well. So we're already, I think, almost over time. So the conclusion of this talk is there's no single magical way to design good games. This is really what I'm trying to get across here. There are so many different ways, but I tried to pick 5 things that I thought were really, really helpful for me, at least, to design better games. Creating stuff that people haven't seen before. Don't be afraid to surprise your audience. You're a game developer first, and then you're a specialist in whatever you do, but you're making things for a game. Then it's accepting that creativity is chaotic at times, and you cannot always plan for it, and that's okay. Just leave some room for it to be creative. The 4th thing was designing an experience. You know, thinking of a composition of the game instead of a set of actions, but also thinking of all the moments in between. And then the last thing was about the team being your target audience also, but also dipping into your own passions, your own ideas, your own background. Use that as an inspiration for whatever it is you're making. I have one more keyword, actually, that I felt like when I moved to Sweden, this really made an impact on me. And I decided to incorporate that in how I work. And that's fika. And I didn't know about this before I moved to Sweden. I was used to working like all the time, non-stop, just going. And then I came here, and people were just taking a break. They were just sitting together, talking about what they were working on. And I thought, like, this, you know what? This is actually the key, because working in a creative industry like game development, the chaos of that can be very stressful. It's very unpredictable. So I thought, like, you need to have these moments where you just sit down, think about what you're doing, and kind of talk to the rest of the team about it. So I want to suggest a Japandinavian way of game design. And that is that you start with the blue sky, which is super free. You can do whatever you want, all the ideas you can have. But then you have a fika time. You sit down, you talk with your teammates about it, like, hey, which ideas are cool, which ones are working, which aren't, which are the ones that we want to move forward to. So you have a little bit of an organized moment here. But instead of moving forward in a very linear way, you open it up again. You have more creativity. You say, okay, now we have a bit of a framework of what we want to do, but let's think about more ideas. Maybe even have a bit more of blue sky, even though it's officially pre-production. And then another fika time. And then opening it up again. So you're kind of alternating the kind of, systemic way of working with a more creative, chaotic way of working. And I think if you do it like that, combining the fika with the creativity, the chaos of creativity, you can make fantastic games. Thank you so much today for this talk. You can find more of my art here. And I hope this inspired you and gave you some ideas of how you want to make games. And thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That was great. We can just one slide ahead, because now we're opening for questions. You ready?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, let's start here and then speak in the mic, please.
Thank you for coming, Marthe. Henrik over here. Curious question about Ma, as you brought it up as a concept. You mentioned Ghibli movies, and you also mentioned a couple of options that were not Ma in that sense. Is there any particular other examples that you can just immediately say, just look in this direction? You mentioned Ghibli movies, but
yeah, for sure. I mean, it's
anything else?
I think. Ghibli is they use it very consciously. They're like stars in using it. I think a lot of movies actually use it in, I think, development of movies. There's a lot of attention of the composition of the entire story. It's also, of course, because you have control over the entire story. And in games, we don't have that. Still, I think there's tons of movies that you can, and like movie background that you can dive into to learn more about, like, hey, how do you use those slower moments? Manga does it a lot as well. Basically, every manga you can find pages like I was showing with just flowers and just the mood and the vibe. I think also nowadays there's a lot of attention for vibe. You have a lot of playlists on Spotify that are just there for the vibe of things, not just for like, hey, I'm a fan of this artist. No, I just want to have the feeling of morning coffee jazz, actually what we had on this morning, for example. I think those are all examples of using Ma, of using those moments of not something happening to create an atmosphere for whatever it is you're making. But I think if you really, really want to see like the best examples, I would say Ghibli movies, just watch them all. And there's tons of examples. I wanted to show way more than that.
Actually, have a follow-up question on that, actually, if we have some time, yeah. Well, in that case, then, why does so many I mean, I'm a big fan of superhero comic books, of video games and whatnot, and I can tell you, you're absolutely right. In many ways, they almost feel stressed with how much they... Why this stress in that case? Or rather, why all this sense of just something needs to happen every single time?
Yeah, I don't know. I think we're a little bit afraid of these quiet moments. I think it's a cultural thing as well. I think especially in Japan, there's a lot of attention for detail, and there's a lot of attention for all the aspects of life. So you have a book that's called In Praise of Shadows, and it's just about shadows. And you don't think of shadows. We usually only think of like, where do I put the lights? But you can also think about like, where do I put the shadows? How I'm going to use the shadows. So there's culturally, I think, in Japan at least, a lot of attention for this other side of life. I think in Sweden you have that a little bit as well, honestly. I think there's actually quite some similarities between Japanese culture and Swedish culture. But I do feel, yeah, we don't even have words for ma. So apparently in our culture it's just not a thing that we pay attention to.
Follow up. not sure if it's a question, but I just, you mentioned superhero movies, and apparently there's a deleted scene from the first Avengers movie with Captain America trying to just adjust to the modern world, which seems like an example of something that could be that, but it was deleted because of like the whole.
Yeah, you need to,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
keep your viewer interested every second. You need to feed them something, action every second. I don't think you have to, but that's, you know, yeah. I mean, you do see it in some Western movies. It's not like it's not there at all. Like I said, I think in a lot of movies and in movie theory, there's actually a lot of attention for using these kind of quieter moments. There's a lot of research into movie theory that we don't really have in games yet. I think because games are still a relatively young kind of medium compared to movies. There's a lot of research, for example, that there's this research that if you see a face of a neutral person, it really depends on whatever scene you put in front of it of how you interpret that face of that person. So if you put a meal, a shot of a nice dinner, and you see that neutral face, people will think that this person is hungry. So people kind of, you know, using these kind of spaces and how you arrange them has a lot of influence on how people perceive it. Because if you put like a young girl in front of this face, people will think like, oh, it's a dad, and he really is like, he really cares about his child. And like, no, it's just a neutral face, but that's just how you fill it in because we put these things together. And so in movies, it is applied, this theory, but in games, I think we still have a lot of opportunity to do so.
Hi, great talk. You talked a bit about how you want to include as many or you want to bring your own personality and the unique kind of concepts into your concepts. But when I worked as a concept artist, I had kind of the opposite issue where I had so many really unique ideas that I wanted to implement, but it gets kind of debilitating at a point. Partly because you have so many of them, and when you try to include them, you kind of dilute the main core of your design. And also because you get that you have a really cool sketch with a lot of movement and personality, and then you kind of lose it at the polishing stage. Have you had any experience with that, and how do you have any routines for kind of solving that issue?
Yeah, I had that a lot as well. Yeah, especially when you have a sketch and it looks amazing, and then you start polishing it and you kind of ruin it. It's very it's a pitfall for a lot of concepting. And honestly, I just don't spend a lot of time on my concepts. It's usually I really try to do it. I'm not a person who can spend a week on one image, for sure. And the concepts you saw of the cities, we did those in one day, usually, like trying to do it kind of quickly. I think there's a lot of strength in doing things quickly because you make quick decisions and you don't overwork it. I think for concept, it's very important not to overwork it. And a lot of times, a sketch was enough. For example, when I worked in Japan, there was absolutely no pressure on making a pretty image at all. It was about the ideas, it was about the movement, and if the sketch was enough, then that was enough. And in terms of using a lot of ideas, that's actually really cool that you have so many ideas to put into your concept. So that's actually a nice thing to have. But I think in that way, for me, it was really important to make sure that I use the right ideas. And I always try to connect it to the thing I was designing to look at the essence of it. Like if with the castle example, not putting every idea I can think of into that castle, just pick one and one that kind of fits with what a castle could be. So you do have to make a lot of decisions of which ideas you're going to implement into a concept that's already relatable for the player. There's always a risk to make something that's completely out there and totally understand, like 100% fantasy, and for players it's not something they understand. You always need to make sure that the bulk of it is something that people immediately understand what is going on, and then you add that small ingredient to it. But it's good that you have so many ideas because you can have tons of concepts still that you can work on. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, great talk. Thank you. I was, I was, I'm a little bit interested in the very early phase of the production when you kind of Because it seems like in Japan they focus a lot on feelings,
Yeah.
and in the West it's more like actions, as you mentioned. So when it comes to conveying the vision of the game, it sounds like that's also very differently done. And how do you do that in Japan by conveying a feeling instead of saying like this is the mechanics we're going with? I mean,
Yeah.
so yeah.
That's a really interesting question. How I saw how that was done in Japan is that there was, of course, documentation. It wasn't like 100% chaos. I want to say that there was some organization, and we did have documentation, art direction documentation, for example. But the big difference for me in Japan was that they often stated things, for example, that they did not want to see in the game, and not per se saying exactly what they did want to see in the game, if that makes sense. So instead of saying like I want exactly this kind of style of armor designs in this game, they would say like, okay, we don't want to have this kind of shiny fantasy armor, we don't want to have glowing orbs, we don't want to have like this, and they would list tons of examples of what they didn't want, and that just gave a lot of room for the team to think about what it could be instead of just following, okay, it has to be this, and I'm just going to make this. So that was one thing I think that for me was really helpful to see. And in terms of during the production, understanding what the game is about was a lot about playing the game as well. I played a lot. Like I know, especially we concept artists, we tend to put on headphones and just do our own thing. But in Japan, I was playing my game constantly, even if it was gray boxes, just to feel what it played like. And I was playing it together. I was testing a Monster Hunter together with my team and kind of having fun, even though everything was gray and like the monsters were basically gray blocks moving around. We had a lot of fun. But just to understand what the game was about, I think playing it, just you have to play it. You have to play your game, even though it's just a prototype, if it's just at the beginning phase. Only then you can really understand where it's going and what could improve it, I think. That for me was really what helped.
Most of the people saying that it was a super insightful talk and saying thank you, and also some comments while I believe it was while you were talking about the walking with the landscapes that ended up in Monster Hunter, with the someone remarking that a good thing. It's a good thing to also do things that are not directly related to playing or making games to get some inspiration sometimes.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think with that being said, we have just time managing a little bit. I have a final question for you, actually. And then we're going to move over to breakfast. But which of all the cities that you lived in did inspire you most creatively, and why? If you could choose one.
That's really hard because I think, honestly, every place just had something that I learned from it. So it's super valuable for me to kind of experience these different places. And of course, Japan was super inspiring. It's just really cool to live there and walk outside and just be there. But then again, in Poland, it was so cool because it's such an artistic culture there, and they have their own whole graphic design style. For example, if you look up movie posters from Poland, they're super cool. So that was really, really inspiring. And being in Sweden, again, like the fashion design, interior design is fantastic. Like, there's so much stuff to learn on every place that I go to that I don't have a favorite place. I kind of feel a little bit nomadic right now. Like, I feel like there's not one place that I want to live or stay forever. I feel like every place has so much cool things that I can learn and kind of absorb and use that again as inspiration for the things that I work on. So I wouldn't be able to pick like one place for that. No.
Makes sense. Well, aren't we glad that you are in Malmö? Okay, awesome. Thank you so much again for sharing. This was great. Another round of applause, I think, for Marthe.
Thank you.
And yeah. I mean, we don't really have so much more. It's breakfast time for those of you who can stay around. And just, stay tuned for more events with Game Habitats. Really nice to have you here. There's going to be more coming up shortly. Just check out the event calendar on our website. And yeah, thank you again for everyone online. Thank you, Linköping. Hope you had a cozy time over there. And yeah, basically, thank you very much and enjoy your day.